Hey, howdy. Hey, my brewing brothers and sisters. I'm here live, another episode of Brew Strong, and my good friend Scott Janish from scottjanish.com and Sapwood Brewery out in the East Coast, Maryland, where everybody is merry. It is the merry land. We just got finished with another show, and so now we're moving on to more hop stuff. Scott, tell people that maybe this is their first show that they've seen you on. Tell them a little bit about yourself, how you got started in this whole hop book writing thing.
Well, it's the my intro into homebrewing is probably the same story that most people have, but mine was the homebrew kit thing, and I still remember the first batch I did because it tasted so bad. It tasted like soap. And I always say I think that's why I was just like didn't give it up. Like it was so bad I knew I could do better, and so I just kept like, come on, I can do better than this. But had that first batch been good, I might have just been like, all right, good, we'll check that one off the box. I don't need to do that anymore.
Yep. I think having a bad first homebrew batch, especially if you've tasted great homebrew, it kind of teaches you, just like, well, wait a minute. You know, Bob over here made great homebrew. Yeah. I'm making bad homebrew. All right. You know, versus if you're comparing it to the greatest commercial beer you ever had, you might be like, I can't do it. They've got advantages, over me with their commercial gear. Right.
Right. That's kind of how I got started, and then just sort of moved on from, oh, it's cool that I can make beer at home, to, all right, let's really try to make beer at home, and got pretty serious about it, and started a blog mostly inspired by, Mike's Mad Fermentationist blog at the time, honestly. Because I appreciated people putting their process and, recipes out, and then out for the world to read, and then having honest feedback from them. Mm-hmm. I think one of my favorite parts of Mike's blog was, if he didn't like the beer, it was pretty clear he didn't like it, but he still wrote about it.
Right.
I trusted him more because of that, and it
mm-hmm.
was almost, what you don't like is sometimes just as important as what you do when you're brewing. And so inspired by that, I started blogging, and then that just kind of grew into, the academic blogging to a book. So it was a slow, organic process, but
speaking of things I don't like and do like, my good friend John Blickman at blickmanengineering.com. Yeah, you've probably seen that gear in your local homebrew shop. You probably drooled over it. Somebody in your club may have a Blickman Engineering piece of equipment. Heck, even your local microbrewery is probably running a Blickman Engineering system. Or if they're not, they're missing out. If you're thinking of opening a small brewery or something like that, you do yourself justice to check out Blickman Engineering. They are making the good thing about them is, I will tell you this, I've known John Blickman for 20 years, whatever. And the most important thing in the world to him is that if you buy a piece of equipment from them, that you're going to be satisfied, that it's actually going to make your brewing day easier, better, your process better. It's going to help you in some way. And if it's not, he doesn't want to sell you anything. It's just the way this guy is. He's wonderful. So in his quest to help the brewing community, he sponsors this show because for some reason, he probably only listened to a show where we had lots of good information. He didn't listen to the show where I talked about my testicles or anything like that. So that's why he still sponsors this show. And what I need you to do is not talk about the testicle thing, but to email feedback@blickmanengineering.com and explain to him that this show is a valuable resource, and you appreciate that he has sponsored it. So check them out, blickmanengineering.com. And like I said, John Blickman is just a wonderful human being, and very kind and helpful to home brewers and pro brewers everywhere. So check them out. All right. So today we are talking about survivables. And I thought that this was fascinating. See, I read scottjanish.com because there's a ton of great information on there. And maybe you don't have the answer to everything, but you pose a lot of interesting questions. And one of them is, what survives kind of the hot side of the brew process that really becomes hoppy. This is one of the things that has kind of irked me for a long time. And maybe I'm totally wrong, but it's that, first wort hopping or mash hopping. The claim that first wort hopping, well, there's some compound or something at temperature in the wort, and it's the same compounds that are in later in the wort. It's just you're exposing the hops for a longer period of time. And then people would point to, well, the Germans write about a finer hop flavor. The Germans don't want hop flavor. They want, when they're talking about flavor, they're talking about bitterness, a smoother, cleaner bitterness, getting rid of a lot of the volatile compounds that have a lot of the characteristic, characters, maybe caddy or whatever, that you don't want in the hops. In a fine German beer, you want a clean, perfect bitterness without this extraneous hop flavor. And I think that's what they were looking for when they talked about first wort hopping. Unfortunately, then we in America grab hold of this and go, well, it says it's better flavor. You get more hop flavor if you put them in the first wort. And for me, I thought that was not the smartest thing. What's your thought on first wort hopping? Let's throw that out there. Let's touch this live rail.
It's funny because it's always hard to define, smoother flavor, too. It's just, what exactly do you mean by that? And can you even tell? Because I would think, most of the hop compounds that you're after, in terms of if we're staying on hazy beers or even West Coast IPAs, most of those monoterpene alcohols and everything you want in the finished beer are going to be long gone if you're first wort hopping. I mean, a 60-minute boil, I think, is probably pushing out most of those compounds. In fact, hydrocarbons like myrcene, for example, are gone in a matter of minutes in hot wort. So I don't think flavor-wise, I don't think I would be able to tell much of a difference between a 60-minute and a first wort addition.
There's the magic that happens, though, because you're first wort hopping. What about that magic? Your
beer smells better sooner while you're brewing.
Right. Yeah, I just in May I can be totally wrong. I often am. I think that's what I'm really well known for. If you Google, I think that's the case.
I must say, though, we do a lot of mash hopping at Southwood.
Okay.
That's more of a beer stability thing based off some research that shows that alpha acids and beta acids introduced to the wort have an ability to complex problematic metals that come from the grain. So, if there's iron or copper, it can kind of reduce those total numbers right away. And in fact, alpha acids have a better ability to do that at higher pHs. And so if you mash hop, even before you make an adjustment to your mash to lower that pH, you might get a even quicker impact on that. And so for us, it's more of a insurance, if it works and we're getting a little bit better stability out of it, especially with hazy beers, which, have a tendency to go downhill a little faster than others. Right. We just don't see a reason not to throw in a pound or two in the mash, but otherwise,
a pound or two in how big a mash?
So that's 10-barrel batch. So an ounce or so for a home brewer, and usually we're just stealing from the whirlpool, or if we have an egg open from a previous use that we have in the cold room, we'll just toss those in.
I've also believed that in dark beers, those roasted grains, it's has an antioxidant property to it that actually helps. But then there's the whole thing about the heat load on your entire beer becomes a negative. Like a lot of crystal malts, affects the stability. But I don't know. I think that was another show we did. You're gonna have to go back and Google and listen more. All right. So, what do you mean by survivable hops?
So, survivables it's a term that Yakima Chief just was kind of throwing around, I guess, internally while they're doing some research in it. And it's one that I just kind of adopted with them because I really like it. It describes kind of what they're after, what they're researching. But, there's, over 1,000 different compounds in hops.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little overwhelming to really dive into all of them.
Right.
So why not just focus on the compounds we know are in the final beer?
Mm-hmm.
Those are they're having an impact on the taste and aroma because they're there. We can test them. And so, why not focus all the research on those? And that's kind of what they did in a recent study. But you almost have to step back a little bit and then kind of define what those classes of hop compounds are. To see, or at least for me, it's helpful to step back and look at those, because then you have a better sense of what each compound might be bringing to the beer and why it's important that it's in there.
Right.
And so, for the longest time, most of the research focused on monoterpene alcohols. So these aren't the hydrocarbons. So those hydrocarbons are, again, like the myrcene type compounds that are more volatile. And those, on hot side wise, I don't think they're sticking around at all. So they didn't focus at all on those. But they did look at the monoterpene alcohols that are found in finished beer, like linalool, geraniol, beta-citronella, those kind of things.
Right.
And those historically have been the compounds that most of the research has been focused on. I mean, linalool, for example, most papers, they determine the hoppiness amount by how much linalool is in there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's been like the magic compound for a while. And so that was one they looked at. And then they also looked at the two newer areas that are interesting to me are hop-derived esters and hop-derived fatty acids.
Okay. Well, let's do this. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll dive into more of survivable hops right after this. All right, we're back. We're talking survivables with Scott Janish from Scott Janish IPA and Sapwood Brewery, and author of the excellent new IPA book that gives you a lot of information about brewing with hops. All right, so we're talking about survivable hops, hops that make it through the hot process into the cold process, and why that's important. One of the things I thought was interesting in the article on your website, scottjanish.com, was you mentioned the importance of tasting beers pre-dry hop. And why is that?
Yeah, it's kind of like an obsession I have with with our hoppy beers, because if you taste your beer, so fermentation's done, you had a healthy, good fermentation, there's no off flavors. You crash out the yeast if you have that ability. I know it's harder as a home brewer. And then so right before adding the hops, I like to pull a sample, adding the dry hops, that is, pull a sample and really smell it and try to analyze the aroma and the flavor that I'm getting from it. Because so often when I use, we're whirlpooling at about 2 pounds per barrel in most of our beers, which is pretty high from my understanding, with a lot of other pro breweries around us anyways. And a lot of times there's like almost no hop flavor at that point. So fermentation itself pushed it off through CO2. You lose some compounds to trub. It's just, for whatever reason, certain hops would have hardly any impact on the final flavor before dry hopping, and some just seem to stick around really well. And so we're always trying new hops, because it's great when you get a lot of hop flavor from a from a hop that's cheap. So you can just load up the hot side with those.
Right.
And so that's why we have like the cheater hops is what we dub like a series of like, Citra, the Galaxies of the world. And then the cheaper hops are just like the Cascade, Columbus of the world. And so for me, it all kind of started with Idaho 7. That was the one hop about a year ago that we used in the whirlpool. And that's, probably around, I think that was all Idaho 7. So 2 pounds per barrel or so. So probably about 10 ounces. I'd have to do the math for a home brewer there. But right before dry hopping, I couldn't believe how aromatic the beer was. It had like a nice piney kind of fruitiness to it. And the flavor was there too. So I really had no idea why that was happening. But Yakima Chief just recently, dissected the Idaho 7 in particular to see, what was in it. And it turns out that it just has the highest percentage of these compounds that are sticking around. So it has the highest amount of these survivable compounds that they know are in finished beer, and the hop itself before it goes into the beer has a lot of them.
So what compounds are those? I mean, what, if we're looking at other hops to try and determine what's the next great Idaho 7 for survivable hop compounds, what compounds are there? I think you listed 4 things: oxygen containing monoterpene alcohols, hop derived esters, branch chain fatty acids, and polyfunctional thiols. Right?
Yeah, that's
okay.
That's the, and each one of those has individual. So those are more like classes of hop compounds, and then you can break those down into more. In terms, a lot. These aren't usually on the, wherever you're buying the hops. They usually don't get into that much detail. Hopefully,
right.
At some point they will.
They don't give you any analysis whatsoever. They're like, alpha acid harvested this date. It's like, do you have any more? They're like, no.
No.
Like,
some
thanks.
of them are doing better now at like telling like the lots, or I think a lot of homebrew packs you can look up now. I'm not 100% sure.
A little more. I mean, it's hard even to get oil content sometimes.
Yeah.
Total oil content. It's like, well, yeah, all right.
That means it has a lot of oil. It has a lot of whatever it has if it's high.
Yeah, it's got something in it. Right.
Yeah. So, but like, so for the hop derived esters, the big one is 2-MIB is the name of it. It's like a apricot forward flavor. And the individual hops that are higher in that would be like a Southern Cross. And then hop derived fatty acids is another one, and that's fatty acids are almost like a precursor to esters. During fermentation, fatty acids get converted into fruity esters, but sometimes they stick around as well. And so Bravo and Apollo are the 2 that stand out. Of this paper, I think tested 12 different hop varieties, and they were high in those. And those are important because, hop, there's so many, it's easy to get almost too confused with all this because there's so many compounds, but it seems that trying to load up your whirlpool with the most complex set of them is kind of the key, because synergy is a big part of this. So they found that the more like hop derived fatty acids were in the beer, it had an additive impact on the fruity monoterpene alcohols. So by dosing in some of these fatty acids, it tasted like there was more of the monoterpene alcohols. It's just a synergistic effect. And they had the same thing with thiols. So, hop derived thiols, the main ones are, 3MH, 3MHA, and 4MMP. And they just found that whenever there was 4MMP, for example, in with the monoterpene alcohols tasted like there was more of them. And so it's more of a, just because Southern Cross is high in, a hop derived ester, 2-MIB, doesn't mean you should just only use Southern Cross.
Right.
It's just, they're all kind of additive, and they work together.
Right. It's interesting. So a friend of mine, Travis, TC from Houston, he will do a lot of smash beers, single malt, single hop, and he does it with all these hops that he's getting. And just recently he sent me some finally, and they were delicious, by the way. But it's a great indicator of an individual hop. But I have it's difficult for me to appreciate a single hop beer. Because there's always a better beer that uses that hop with some other hop.
Yeah.
It's like you're saying the synergy of using multiple hops really brings out so much more. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts when you use multiple hops and you use that in that collaboration. That's why I like that kind of database you have on your website that kind of sorts hops by the compounds in them. It's interesting because it's like, okay, it's like layering flavors on when you're cooking. You're trying to build something more than just cooking a steak. When you cook a steak, you add other flavors to it because a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, all of a sudden, oh my God, you got something more, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting too that I think you can go too much the other way. I don't know what your experience is, but
right.
if you start layering, even 3 sometimes for me is too many hops in one beer. But
sure,
if you're going 4 or 5, 6 different varieties, to me, I just tend to get more of a generic hoppiness.
Yes.
Yeah, and so you can go too high the other way by trying to be too diverse. So, usually we're doing, I think I mentioned in the last show, whenever we do single hop beers, we almost always do cryo with the pellet version because it builds in a little more complexity because you're having a different set of, the same amount, you're having different amounts of those oils. And so they're similar in nature, but they're pelletized so much differently.
Right.
And usually, yeah, two varieties is kind of where I like to go. And if I'm trying out a new variety, I almost always pair it with Citra because Citra just goes well with everything. So you have a
Citra is king. Yes. Yeah. I'll do 3 generally. But that's, something in the kettle that is really just, more of a background and then, a couple in the dry hop. And it depends, I guess, when I do something like a classic German Pilsner or something like that, or some of those other beers, I will do, a single hop in a lot of those.
I guess when I say like 2, I'm talking just dry hopping. So the hot side we'll use multiple varieties because that's where we're just trying to load it up with as many compounds as we can. But yeah, dry hopping is usually 1 to 3 for us. I don't know. Do you ever if you're doing 3, do you change the amounts or you just split them up evenly?
We'll change the amounts.
Yeah.
It depends. What we want more character from. We kind of, I don't know. You brew long enough and you kind of have this sense of, a little more of that, a little less of that. You don't have any scientific proof. You don't have any, detailed logs and spreadsheets of analysis. You just go like, a little more of this, a little less of that. Yeah, throw it in here, throw it in there, and Bob's your uncle. There you go.
Whichever hop costs more, you just dry hop with that one last, so it sticks around.
Exactly. That's the problem with commercial brewing. Let's see here. If you have any questions, you can enter them into the comments on Facebook. Yeah, this is all live, and the beautiful Beverly Moore, Bevo, is there. Monitoring your chat, and she is providing those questions to us. And a reminder, we're going to do this live every week on Wednesday, starting 1 p.m. Pacific, until I catch up with all the shows we should have been doing the last 6 months. I apologize to our sponsors and our listeners. I don't really apologize to Justin because that does no good. Bevo, I would apologize to. She is too sweet and too kind. Let's see. She says, Julia says, Survivables. Can coriander with loads of linalool and some geraniol be used in the whirlpool as a substitute for hops. For example, in a sour with lacto yeast co-fermentation to prevent killing the lacto with hop alpha acids. Oh, interesting. If so, how much grams per liter coriander would you recommend? So this is a fascinating question. Obviously, Julius understands a lot of what's going on. We talk about linalool, geraniol being biotransformed, being part of, making a juicy beer, but he's mixing in also, on sour beer, when you have lactobacillus that is harmed by hop alpha acids, could you use coriander? All right, Scott, you're on the must answer this question.
We've done it. So
Oh,
Mike has done. I believe he wrote a blog post years ago about using coriander for its high geraniol composition to see if you could get biotransformation, because that's one of those, again, that we know sac strains do. You don't need a different enzyme that like wine yeasts or Brett are capable of doing. And so we have a goza that we've done twice now, where we add coriander to the fermenter at the same time we pitch yeast. Again, because that biotransformation is happening in the first couple days of fermentation. So we're just trying to get that geraniol in there early. I don't know off the top of my head what our rate was for the of using it, but it turns out well, because it really shifts the coriander to more of like a citrusy lime kind of flavor, and away from something you might have in your cupboard. And so it works really well for us, and it's more of like it's not a dominant flavor. It's just more kind of in there for complexity. So, and then that beer too, generally we have, we're co-pitching most of our beers that have lacto in them. We're keeping alive, unless we're going to, have the mobile canners come through, then we have to kill it off in the kettle.
Right.
But we're pitching lacto at the same time as sac, or giving lacto a 24-hour head start before pitching some yeast. And so it turns out pretty well in our beer when we take that approach that he was mentioning.
Is it possibly a less expensive way of getting linalool, geraniol in your wort in the whirlpool for juicy beers?
It probably, yeah. I don't know the cost per ounce of coriander per some good.
I don't know if you know this, but I'm a cheap bastard, so I'm gonna figure that out. I'm gonna see if I can do it, and maybe I'll try a 120 barrel batch with coriander instead. I will tell you this: there's a huge difference in the types of coriander available, and I learned this at Sipsmith in London. They make gin, and we were doing a collab with. I was making a goza at Fuller's. 250 British barrels. And we threw in lactobacillus in their facility and everything else, and they thought we'd lost our minds. But
hopefully they got that lacto out of their facility. It's
absolutely the greatest collab ever. They left me to run the brew plant when a tour was coming through. It was so much fun. But we couldn't get coriander for some reason. We walked across the street to Sipsmith, which is in the Fuller's parking lot, and they make amazing gins. And they gave us some coriander, and it was a smaller coriander seed. And what I found is the smaller the coriander seed, the more citrus it seems to have. The bigger the coriander seed, it becomes much more black pepper. Yeah. So if you're looking at coriander seeds, look for the smallest coriander seeds. They tend to be far more citrusy. I mean, it was just night and day. So I wonder, have they done a study of coriander seed size versus linalool and geraniol concentration?
There was a study on using that a while back.
Oh yeah.
And I agree with you that I think we get ours from a place. I don't know if it's like just local to us, called like H Mart, I think is where we get a lot of this stuff. But
Dollar Tree.
Yeah, Dollar Tree. That's where you get the best coriander.
Oh yeah.
But there's a huge difference. The one that we used, it smells almost more like Fruity Pebbles or something than, and so the ingredients you put in your beer definitely is a huge impact. It's not
definitely makes a difference.
Yeah.
Todd was asking, he wants us to discuss how terrible wet hop beers are in the same fashion.
What? We don't get a lot of opportunities to do wet hop beers on the East Coast. There's not as, the turnaround to get them to us isn't as quick. And there's some hop growing around us, but I don't have, I don't have direct lines on a lot of these things. But yeah, it seems, I don't know what your opinion is, wet hop beers, but they do seem a little greener in nature than.
Yes, you have to enjoy that, chewing on a leaf, kind of chewing on cabbage before it's fully ripe or too ripe.
I love the concept of wet hop beers.
Yeah. I love it, because it's not like something you get all the time, and it really does depict, kind of the character of the hop before it's fully, dry, and how you use it later on. It accentuates that chlorophyll and the kind of that green, raw kind of vegetable character, and it's cool. And I like anything that was well fermented. So, you can throw that in there, and it's not that bad for me.
I'd be curious to try a wet hop beer where the wet hops were added like day one of fermentation, and maybe some of that greener character thing that would blow off a little bit, and maybe you'd be left with some of the more polar, fruitier compounds. But that's not something I've tried, but that would be an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, once a year thing. We're gonna need to take another short break. If you're listening live, stay tuned. We're gonna be back in just a few seconds. If you're listening on the podcast, enjoy listening to our fine sponsors. Make sure to support them. We will be back right after this. All right, we're back. We're live with Brew Strong and Scott Janish from scottjanish.com and Sapwood Brewery out in Maryland. We've been talking about survivables, which is what hop compounds are surviving the process of the boil or the whirlpool, the hot side, that make it to the cold side. And surprisingly, Scott's pointed out that like Idaho 7 has like the greatest survivability of the hot side into the cold side. Which hops are better survivors? And break this down for me from like the boil, the whirlpool, and even dry hopping. Which ones are we looking for each phase of our brewing?
Well, if I just point to like the Yakima Chief study that was done recently, where they
have a great chart on your website as well.
Yep, and that's coming straight from them, where they did I think it was 6 or 7 of these survivable compounds. So it's a mix of monoterpene alcohols, hop drive esters, and thiols, and looked at each hop variety to see, which ones are having the most of the combination of these important survivable compounds. And Idaho 7, like we said, was number 1. We've actually found that when we're using Idaho 7 as in the whirlpool, we like to use it as like half of it, because it can almost be too much and interfere with some of the especially more subtle dry hop varieties. But Mosaic was number 2. Mosaic is another one that we use quite a bit on the hop side, actually paired with Idaho 7 quite a bit.
Wow. Yeah.
And Bravo is one that was number 3. And that's an interesting one, because Bravo is high in these in total oil, it's high in monoterpene alcohols. And so if it's high in total oil and monoterpene alcohols, it just means kind of has more of those. It was also high in some of the hop-derived esters. And so it's just like one of those that kind of hits all the check marks individually for some of these compounds. So it makes sense that it's up there. Millennium is one that I haven't used yet that I would really like to. That's also high. Simcoe is another one. I'm interested in, so one of the hop thiols is 3MH, which is like a grapefruit type thiol and thiols, I should say, are just, they're sulfur compounds in hops, and they're very, very small percentage of the total oil. But their thresholds, the sensory thresholds are really low. And so you don't need a lot of them in there to actually have an impact on the beer. And 3MH is one that gets converted to 3MHA, which is like a passion fruit one with the right yeast or enzyme. But on its own, it's good as like a grapefruit thing. But that was one of the only compounds that actually was tested to increase with time in the boil. So it would make sense to me to use the hops that are high in 3MH as like your bittering addition if you're doing that. Because if that 3MH is going to keep increasing, you increase the chance of that being converted potentially to a passion fruit thing, or you're just increasing more of that beneficial survivable compound. And Millennium is one that was really high in that. And so that's one I'm planning on experimenting with in a little bit here. So, and that's kind of the thing with all this. It's like the science is just fun to help steer us to try new things with a little intention. It doesn't mean it's always going to pan out.
A little purpose, giving something a shot, and here's the reason why. It's the purpose of any scientific study. It's like, well, here's my theory. High levels of 4-MMP are going to lead to, this, that, the other thing. And so I'm going to use a hop with that. And that's my theory. And I'm going to prove it, disprove it. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. So Millennium, you would suggest for the boil, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to get the passion fruit or something like that, right?
Yeah, anything that's high in that 3MH. Otherwise,
3MH.
The whirlpool is really where it's at for all these compounds. I mean, I think you're going to have higher retention of all these in the whirlpool. Probably even if you have the ability to cool your whirlpool a little bit before adding the hops, I think you would increase that even more.
Right. You suggest 180 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yep, that's what we tend to shoot for most of ours. And if we go a little lower, we might increase the contact time there. But so, usually 180 degrees, 2 pounds per barrel, probably around 10 ounces for a home brewer, and then at least 20 minutes or so of contact time at 180.
And then in dry hopping, is there like a difference, survivability in the dry hopping versus, are there hops that survive dry hopping better?
I guess, dry hopping is interesting because, if you're doing it post fermentation, and especially if you're doing it under pressure, so you have, 5 pounds of pressure on the headspace or something, there's not a lot of variables that should detract from those compounds that extract, if that makes sense. I mean, fermentation is done. You're at a cooler temperature, so you're not worried about heat pushing any aromatics or compounds out. So I think at that point, it's more of what flavor profile are you after, and then sort of targeting hops based on that. You can use a little of the science to guide you in terms of pushing yourself away from more greener compounds, especially in these hazy beers that we discussed, for more viscous and retain some of those otherwise more volatile green compounds. But that might be one thing to consider. But I think overall, they're probably, what is in that hop in terms of their oil makeup is probably just being extracted in a similar manner post ferm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, which goes to, the hops that we've added in the whirlpool or the boil. Those compounds need to survive fermentation. Is there a difference in which hops survive fermentation better, or in which yeasts promote certain flavors? I think yeast has an incredible impact on what the finished beer is, and will take away your hops, give you hops, take away your malts. It has the ability to do a lot. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I 100% agree. There was a new paper that came out. I think they tested maybe 10 different yeast strains, and they basically, it was the same beer, but they used different yeast strains with the same hops, and then they had drastically different final compound measurements for each one of those yeasts. So some yeasts are leaving some, potentially beneficial compounds behind more than others. And the one that this paper found, of course, this was only studying a handful of yeast strains, so it doesn't mean it's the best, but what is it, S33, and what is it, I think K97. So these are dry yeast strains. They had the highest amount of, by far the highest of these apricot leaning hop derived esters in the final beer. And the sensory panel also found them to be the most aromatic in terms of fruity flavors. So I think yeast strain is so huge in brewing, and that's
right.
That we just brewed a beer that had 3% Hefeweizen yeast as part of like normal, like 13, 18 type primary ferment. It doesn't take much at all to get that, to completely change your profile of your beer with just a little bit more of another yeast strain.
Right.
And so I love playing with different blends. I've done a lot of co-ferments with wine yeast. So I'll do, 5 to 10% of the yeast pitch with wine yeast that has beta glucosidase that can bioconvert and release additional flavors from hops. The same kind of hops or same compounds that, the wine world has been looking at for a long time. And it's been tricky because most of the wine yeast leave like a really phenolic aftertaste to the beer. So maybe there's some bioconversion going on, but I just can't get past the fermentation profile that it's leaving. That's
right.
And so I've tried 6 or 7 different wine yeasts, and almost always it's like that. The only one that I had good luck with was a wine strain called Vin 7, and that was co-pitched with a lager at cooler temperatures. So as a way to try to tamper down that phenolic thing, but it makes you also paranoid how important cleaning is. If only a percent or two of a different strain and can make a big difference.
Yeah heat is your friend at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's take a short break and hear from our friends who've make the show possible, and we'll be back right after this. All right, we're back doing Brew Strong with a good friend, Scott Janish. Let's see here. We were talking about fermentation affecting, the flavor of beer. I mean, that's just a massive thing. And, really the hops that, will, survive kind of fermentation, but it really depends on the yeast. I think, some may last past the yeast, but here's another question I have for you. You're telling me I should take my hops and leave them out, poke holes in the nitrogen sealed bags, leave them out warm, sitting around for a year warm, or whatever the heck you're talking about. You're telling me take my valuable hops and abuse them and then throw them in the whirlpool because I'm going to build up the branch chain fatty acids in those hops, and that's going to give me something better. Now, full disclosure, I'm willing to give this a try on a 120 barrel batch. I'm gonna go for it. I do have Apollo on hand. I do have Apollo on hand, and I do have a beer that I brew like every week at 120 barrels. So I'm willing to give this a shot. Explain yourself, my friend. Explain yourself.
I'll explain the research of others, so then I'm not on the hook.
Oh, blame it on others.
The hop-derived fatty acids. So that's an oxygen. Actual alpha acids are being oxidized into these fatty acids. So the more you leave them out, the more fatty acids you'll have. So, I wouldn't recommend, like, again, it's not all about these, right? It's, you want some of it. So it's not like, 100% of your whirlpool. I probably wouldn't do super aged Apollo. I mean, you just want to push some of those in because they have that synergistic effect that we were talking about earlier. And I actually reached out to the author of this paper because he found that, Apollo was one of those that had the most of these. I think Apollo and Bravo had the most of these fatty acids. And so just on their own, but then if you were to age them a little bit, you'd get even more of them.
Right.
And so I asked him, like, what exactly he meant by that. And his recommendation was, like a year at room temperature, essentially.
Oh my God.
And for me, that just means, like, I'm less afraid at the brewery to use hops on the hot side that are just in our cold room. Or we're in transit for a long time, or whatever the case is. I'm more concerned with how hops are treated for the dry hops, and this just makes me feel a little better about getting poorly treated hot side hops, and a lot of the dry hops that we intend to use that don't smell good. It's like, just because it's in the recipe doesn't mean it's going in the beer. So we'll smell them before we use them. If they're not that great, then we'll usually just put them in the cold room and leave them for a while, and then try them on the hot side.
I think a couple of things. One is, if I leave a box, if I pierce a bag of Apollo hops and leave it out room temperature for a year, when I go back to use this hop, they're going to smell like cheese and And if I was throwing them in the boil, if I was giving it 60 minutes to blow off the cheese, maybe. But if you're telling me to throw them in the whirlpool at like 180, I think I'm going to trap a lot of that cheese in my beer. Is that not the case?
Well, I guess I'd have to go back and look. I'm pretty sure he didn't recommend
cheese.
You don't want cheese in the beer.
Little cheddar. Could we cheddar whirlpool? Cheddar hop. Cheddar. Dry cheddaring.
So you just said it. Now it's probably going to be the next big thing here.
You heard it here first. We had the whirlpool coriander. Now we have the dry cheddaring. We have beers coming out that are going to taste spectacular.
I wouldn't probably poke holes in the bag that I was leaving out for a year unless I was going to use them in, like, we do a lot of mixed firm beers, lambic inspired beers.
It's in your blog. You wrote poke some holes.
But it's like
I'm not making this up.
You're right. It's like you don't want like a poorly stored, in my opinion. Like if it smells really awful, I probably won't use it. It's more of like it's faded a little bit, right? And so like you're not going to use it as a dry hop, but you're still comfortable using it in the whirlpool. It's a little old. It probably has more of these fatty acids that can both be good for synergy and as well as be esterified into fruity esters during fermentation. So,
is the oxidative effects developing more of the fatty acids?
Yeah. So the more they're exposed, I believe the more they're exposed to oxygen, the more of these.
The greater the right.
Yeah.
So see on the end, if you get a ton of them, it smells like rotten cheddar. Just saying.
Yeah,
there you go.
I like how you said you got to cheese them off too. So by not using them in the world, those would be good ones maybe to use in the mash hopping too, where some of those, you still have some alpha acids left in them, so you're getting that stability benefit, and then you're giving them time to cheese off, but those fatty acids might still carry through a little bit and have a positive impact.
Right. You'll carry the fatty acids through. Okay. No, I'm no matter how much I joke about it, I'm curious to give it a try. At this point, I have people, which I say, look, do this, and they go like, well, that sounds stupid. Do it anyways. It's like 2 or 3 conversations, but eventually I get them to do what I want, and we try these weird things. So we'll try dry cheesing or first wort cheesing. Stuart asks, with more and more hop varieties coming in the market every year from Africa, Australia, Eastern Europe, Britain, etc., what non-US hops are lighting your fire? Assuming you have a fire.
I have a fire and hops light it. Let's see which ones do it. I'm trying to think. Is it Nectaron? I think they just renamed one of the new
Nectaron.
Yeah,
sounds like a Transformer movie.
I know it's a goofy name, but I think it was 4337. Maybe was the number that was assigned to it before it was officially Nectaron. But that was a pretty good one. It was Galaxy-like in what I've used. To me, Galaxy has like a fruit stripe gum thing when it's really, really good.
Yeah.
This had a little bit of that. That's one that I really like. And of course, non-US ones, Galaxy is always way up there for us.
Right.
It's just great. I'm a big fan of like Holler Tower Blanc, especially mixed with a little Mosaic. I think that's a great combo. In fact, that's a combo that we've done with just a little bit of Belgian yeast with too. So little Belgian yeast and Mosaic and Holler Tower Blanc is a fun beer. But there's so many that are always coming out, and it's hard to track. In fact, I look here, the Survivables thing they did, one of the so it's HBC 692 was pretty high on the list for having a lot of these compounds. So that's another experimental one that might be worth trying on the hot side.
Well, and I think pick some from the high end of this list, pick some others that have other characteristics. It's like you're saying earlier, the synergy of the hops, mixing hops really helps.
Yeah, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket with one variety because the paper found it was high in one compound.
Right, exactly. You need multiple compounds. Yeah. Samuel was asking, the golden rule for dry hopping is 8 grams per liter as the upper bound. 5 grams per liter for a typical homebrew setup. I think 5-ish. Yeah. Before saturation and money loss. What are Scott's thoughts on if that is for a single dry hop or if that is total dry hop over the course of 2 or 3 days? Is it 8 grams per liter total or per dry hop charge? I will tell you this. If you're homebrewing, you're worried about money loss, just open a commercial brewery. Stop homebrewing. Homebrewing is not about saving money. If you homebrew, you're going to throw money away and you're going to enjoy it and you're going to have the best beer in the world and you're just going to have an amazing time. Homebrewing is not about saving money. Yeah. Commercial brewing is about throwing money away. If you want to, if you're worried about throwing money away and money loss, open a brewery. There you go. So 8 grams per liter, is that the total upper? So I think upper limits for dry hopping. Before we talked about this earlier, there's a limit to dry hopping where you're wasting hops. I think the Hammer talked about this. What is it? And I think it's total would be the answer.
It's probably a total figure. I would guess.
Yeah.
It's just so hard to, I would almost hate for there to be an actual golden rule for hopping, because that means everyone's doing the same thing.
Right. Like writing a book of recipes and then everybody's brewing the same recipes and entering in a competition. That sucks. I mean, what kind of a world is that?
And I actually purposely didn't, despite I'm sure people would love recipes in, I purposely didn't put a single recipe in mine, because the whole point is trying to encourage people to like use the science to be creative.
You have to give people a starting point. Give people a starting point that they can use and, see that it has, that it worked. Yeah. And then they can go from there. And then you can kind of give them the, okay, here's things to try. But you got to give them a starting point. This is the biggest failure of your book.
No recipes.
No recipes. It was just horrible because of that. I got no recipes out of it. I'm sure you've gotten comments. All right. Oh, yeah, so you write a book and then you get comments about, oh, it's horrible because of this. It's horrible because of that. It's just like, oh my God, what? Because I didn't include recipes? Please.
I definitely got a lot of.
There was a typo in it.
The early version had weird like spacing and stuff because it was self-published. So I was kind of learning as I was going, and it's like
right.
But
I honestly think it's a great book. It's one of the few books written by somebody else that I've enjoyed a lot. No, I don't mean that. I love all the books out there. I'm reading a great one, Strange Tales of Ale, by Martin in England. I truly think your book is, everybody who's brewing should have it. It's one of those great books that just really asks a lot of great questions, answers a lot of great questions. I think that is, something pretty special. You don't see those very often.
Well, so I appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you, especially. So,
well, there you go. Well, I thank you very much for participating in this. I want to mention our good friends at brewchatter.com. Those guys, they understand great homebrew. They have great ingredients. I'm sure they have Scott's book there in stock for you to go run down and check it out. They're in Sparks, Nevada, right next to Reno. And they're also got, you can order all this stuff from them online, brewchatter.com. Say hi to Josh and RJ for me. Really great guys. And if you want to order Blickman Engineering stuff, they've got it at their place. They can order it for you. They're big on any kind of equipment you want. They can do it. They know they brew very successfully. So they know what they're doing. Anyways, check them out, brewchatter.com. All right. Thanks again, Scott. This has been very enjoyable and I think very educational for me and for the listeners. And hope to have you back again soon. Or maybe we'll collab on a brew. That'd be fun. I think, I'll be throwing in the cheddar. You'll be throwing in the coriander.
You're going to start aging that Apollo now.
There you go. I will get a bag out. I will literally, after this, drag a bag of Apollo out, and we'll leave it until we collab, and then you have to use that bag of Apollo. How's that sound?
Sounds like a deal.
All right. Thank you much. Thanks to our listeners. Thank you to the beautiful Bevo for handling the chat for us and making this all possible. I had fun. Hope you all did too. Till next time, brew strong.